Good evening and welcome to the September meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones or electronic device on silent if they have one near them, and not to place papers or electronic devices between themselves and the microphones. Please would remote participants mute microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise. Members of the Council should leave their cameras on. After each item has been presented, members and independent persons present in the room will be invited to ask questions first. Those members joining us remotely will then be invited to speak, and they should indicate their wish to do so by using the Raise Your Hand facility. Only those members of the Audit and Standards Committee present in the room will be making the decisions, and the result will be confirmed verbally for the benefit of those watching the webcast. Thank you. So, agenda item 1, may I sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record? Thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence.
Councillor Harmer, Chair.
Councillor Harmer, Chairman of the Council. Thank you. Item 3, additional agenda items. I'm informed there are none. So, item 4, disclosures of interest, please. Councillor Barnes.
When we get to the Statement of Accounts, Chairman, on page 82, I want to take note that I'm the Vice Chairman of the Rother District Housing Company. I'm also the Vice Chairman of the Etchingham Trust for Sport and Recreation.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
And also the same page, same item, as Chair also of the Rother District Housing Company. Thank you.
Thank you. And for myself, same page, same item, very well connected with Light Up Bexhill. Councillor Langlands.
Exactly, same page, the Rother District, Housing Association, please. Myself as well, as member of the board.
Thank you. Have you been to a meeting yet?
No.
No. Thank you.
Same page for me as well. I'm a trustee and treasurer of the Hastings and Rother Mediation Service, which appears on that.
Thank you. Councillor Madeley.
Yes, Chairman, you prompted me. Light Up Bexhill.
Thank you. Councillor Cortell.
The Rother representative with the Hastings Furniture Service, which receives some revenue from Rother for services.
Thank you very much. It would probably have been easier to ask if anyone didn't have any disclosures of interest. But, oh, thank you. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Right. Thank you. Agenda item, where are we? Part A, there are no standards being dealt with tonight. That's the next meeting, so it's audit reports. Agenda item 5, report of the external auditor, Grant Thornton, and for a progress report, we're joined by Omar. How do you pronounce your surname, Omar?
You can say Abbas.
Abbas, okay. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. So I will be presenting the progress report of Rother District Council on behalf of Grant Thornton. I'll start with the audit update. We undertook our initial planning for the year 21-22 audit in March 22 and issued a detailed audit plan setting out our proposed approach to the audit. And we are now planning to commence the substantive audit work from October 2022. And we aim to report to the committee with our audit findings report in December. We also plan to issue our auditor's annual report detailing our VFM work within the deadline set out by the National Audit Office. We continue to liaise with the finance officers to discuss any emerging issues to promote the efficient delivery of audit and provide a range of publications to support the authority. Your officers attended our accounts workshop held in January and February 2022, where we highlighted the financial reporting requirements for local authority accounts and gave insights into elements of our audit approach. Following the issuance of 2021 audit opinion on 20th May 2022, we have finalised the audit fee for that year, which totals to £65,000. This is £5,000 more than the audit plan and pertains to increased work to review the accounting treatment of infrastructure assets, and there was some additional work arising due to local accounting issues. Lastly, the updates specific to local authority sectors have been summarized from pages 7 and onwards of the progress report. I understand that might be different page numbers from your public report pack. I don't have anything else to report at this point of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the auditor? No. In that case, I see it's for us. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Councillor Thomas.
Can I just say, I noticed there is quite a number of examples of slippage on capital projects. Is that an unusual number, or is that just what we might expect in the ordinary course of affairs, please?
Won't be able to respond to this question because I have not yet been involved in the audit so far. The previous audit was undertaken by a different manager, but I can take a note of this and I can query this with Darren, if that's fine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Mr. Baden's going to attempt.
Thank you, Chair. I think there isn't really a benchmark figure or anything like that to answer Councillor Thomas's question. All I would say is that you need to bear in mind that we have just come out of the pandemic, and that was reported regularly to members throughout. That slowed down the progress of pretty much everything we were doing. So it's perhaps not too surprising that there is quite a lot of slippage in our capital programme.
Thank you. Any other questions? I see it's here to note the report of the external auditor. Do we agree with that? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I be excused from the remainder of the meeting as I have another audit committee to attend?
That's why I'm glad I remembered to say thank you, so you could disappear. Thank you. Right, agenda item 6, which is the statement of accounts. Hopefully all members have received the update, the 90-page update. And over to Mr. Baden, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so it's the 21-22 statement of accounts. These are still very much draft accounts. The audit begins next month in earnest, so we're still some way of having a set of accounts that have been signed off. That being said, there's a huge amount of detail in there, as you've just alluded to, Chair. There's 90 pages worth of detail. I didn't receive any questions beforehand, but I'm more than happy to take any after I've presented the report. But please bear in mind there's a lot of detail in there, so we may not have immediate answers to hand. But I'll just say a couple of things to the report, if I may. So, as I say, there's 90 pages worth of information in there. It's subject to audit. I'm not expecting any major changes. We've not had any qualification issues with our statement of accounts in the last 2 years, and possibly not beforehand. I can only go back over the time that I've been at Rother, and we're not expecting any qualification issues this year either. And just to explain why that's important, there's a big credibility issue to the council. We don't want a set of qualified accounts. It's very important to us and to our stakeholders that we're able to deliver an unqualified set of accounts, and we expect that situation to continue. If I just say a little bit about the statement of accounts themselves, they were produced by my principal accountant, Ola Janovic, who is set aside on my right here. I've brought Ola along for protection in case there are questions that I can't field myself, but Ola's done an excellent job, and her team have done an excellent job in putting this information together, and those who were at the training session before committee will hopefully appreciate that. So the members are asked just to note the report at this stage. It discusses the main issues that's affected our accounting statements during 21-22. There have been no changes to the accounting code of practice during 21-22, or no major changes. That's necessitated any changes in presentation of the accounts. In the main body of the report, which members might find helpful, and members of the public may find helpful as well. There's some little explanations as to what the key statements are and what they mean. So movement and reserves, that's a bit of a peculiarity to local government. You wouldn't find that normally in a private sector set of accounts. It literally does what it says on the tin. It shows the movement in reserves between one financial year to the other. There is another peculiarity there that sits with local authorities in that we have usable reserves, and to put that bluntly or put it simply, they're cash-back reserves. That's money that we can spend. And then you have unusable reserves, which are full of basically technical accounting adjustments. They don't mean that the council is awash with that cash. It's not. They're not usable, and hence the phrase unusable reserves. So we have a comprehensive income and expenditure statement. Now, if you try to draw sort of parallels between the comprehensive income and expenditure statement and the management accounts that we bring to Overview and Scrutiny Committee and Cabinet on a quarterly basis, you won't be able to, because the comprehensive income and expenditure statement contains all the non-cash technical adjustments that we're required to do under international accounting standards, or international financial reporting standards, should I say. So it's very difficult trying to match one against the other and see where the differences are, because they are numerous. I think, put it very simply, the management accounts that we bring to Overview and Cabinet on a quarterly basis that's really about how the council spends its council tax income, its business rates income and government grants in the financial year. Whereas the comprehensive income and expenditure statement is much more about compliance with international reporting standards. The balance sheet, there's also differences in the balance sheet as well as, and one of those differences I've just explained, the difference between usable and unusable reserves. But the balance sheet does give, for an organisation, it sort of gives you a snapshot, if you like, of an organisation's financial health. And our balance sheet is still very strong, and Grant Thornton have commented on that in the past. So it's still a fairly good-looking picture for us as a council. A little bit there about the pension fund liability. And again, this is another distinction that members will need to draw between the council and a private sector firm. We have a pension fund, the local government pension fund scheme. It's run for us by East Sussex County Council, and it's a scheme that's in deficit, which is not uncommon across the public sector. In fact, it's depressingly common across the public sector. But you'll see from the report that the liability to the council, or the council share of the fund liability, has decreased from 22 million last year to 11 million this year. So that liability has gone down considerably, by about 11-12 million from the previous year, I think it is. So again, it's a bit of an oddity in our balance sheet, and it will always be there. It's about compliance with the reporting standards, but it is also about there is an on-the-ground relevance to the pension liability as well, because the actuaries, the pension actuaries, will value the fund and sometimes will make recommendations on employer and employee contribution rates, so that we can look to drive down the level of liability. So there is a bit of relevance, real-life relevance there as well. The cash flow statement is literally what it says on the tin, if you like. It's money going in and money going out, and that's a commonality with what we have with private sector accounting as well. So there's a set of figures for members there to have a look at. And finally, the collection fund income and expenditure account, and this really is a peculiarity to local government and local government only. The collection fund is, we are legally obliged to keep a separate account for the collection fund. And the collection fund is the council tax and business rate income that goes through it. Nothing else goes through it. Nothing else comes out of it. It's just collection fund, business rate income rather, and council tax, including the amounts that we have to pay preceptors for their share of the council tax, and also for their share of business rates. So that's right near the end of the accounting statements. So in conclusion, the balance sheet shows overall that we're in our financial health is sound, and we have an adequate amount of reserves in place to meet short-term needs. It says a little bit there. I won't read it word for word, Chair. I'm sure members have already had a look at it. A little bit there about COVID-19 exacerbating financial pressures. Again, that shouldn't be anything new to members. We've reported that regularly through the last financial year and since the start of COVID, in actual fact. So That's it from me, Chair. I'm happy, and with Ola's assistance, I suspect, I'm happy to field any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baden. Are there any questions from members? Yes, Mr. Farr.
Just a couple for you, Tony. The pension fund, would you suggest that maybe with the current economic climate, it is as likely to be reversed next year as it is now? So it swung one way, but I would say in the current financial climate, it's just as likely to swing the other way.
Yeah, amongst many skills, being an actuary isn't one of them, I'm afraid, Mr. Farmer, but I would suggest that your assessment is probably right. We won't know until we get the report at the end of the 22-23 financial year, by which time the financial picture will have changed significantly again from what it is now. But yeah, I suspect that might well be the case.
So members really shouldn't take too much notice of these swings because it doesn't really impact on how the council's financial position is.
I would say, I mean, it doesn't. Well, for a start, it doesn't impact on the council's cash position. That's the important thing to note. Say not take too much notice of the swings. Yeah, that's a fair point, but I do think it's important to sort of try and understand the principles behind the pension fund liability. So it's of academic interest in some respects, but it is, nonetheless, the concepts are quite important for members to grasp. But yeah, you're right. It's such a volatile situation at the moment that by the time we get to March next year, the valuation of the fund liability could well be significantly different to what we see it at the moment.
Second question for you. The business rates and the large deficit, because we've been giving businesses back money because of COVID, you imply that you might get some of that back from additional government grants. Do you think it will be completely recovered?
Yeah, if I may through yourself, Chair, that's a very good question. We have been getting that money. So when the government have announced business rate release, what they give us in place of that is what's called Section 31 grant money. So it gives government a provision, if you like, or an ability to pay reimburse councils for things like business rate release. We got quite a lot of that through the pandemic. So there's still a little bit of there's still a little bit of calculation and review work that's needed around those business rate figures, even going into the current financial year. But on the whole, we were very cautious around what we thought would be reimbursed pound for pound. But on the whole, we expect most, if not all of it, to be reimbursed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Langland.
Well, actually, Patrick, you just prompted me with a question on the pensions. So how long would you look at a deteriorating picture on the pensions before you actually re-evaluated what needs to be done to bring that back up again?
I can't answer that question for Councillor Langlands unless Ola knows. It's something that we will discuss with our actuaries, and we do discuss the pension report with the Sussex County Council because they administer the fund. So we do talk to them about the report and question the report that they give us every year when they produce it. But in terms of the assumptions that are made in respect to what you've just said, Councillor Langlands, I don't know how they would do that. We can ask and find out, but it's, I suspect, a question that they might have difficulty answering at the moment in the current climate because it is so volatile. But we can ask and get back to you.
Yeah, that's great. It was just my concern was this could be a long-term problem and it could actually keep going in a sort of negative way. But that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, it has been a long-term problem. It might be useful at some stage if the pension board report were circulated to us, because we don't control the pension scheme. I don't even think we've got a representative on the board, have we, Chairman?
No idea, but I will find out unless Tony knows.
No, I
you get the start of a 10 on that one because we don't know, but we will find out.
Sorry, my chair. Yeah, to pick up on your point, Councillor Barnes, happy to share the report. It might be a better way of dealing with it. Might be to have some sort of meet and discuss rather than email out something to members. We could email it out. We could email it out tomorrow, but very much like the statement of accounts, except on a much smaller scale. There will be a lot of complexity in there, and it would probably be easier if we were.
I don't think I was suggesting it was circulated. I think it might be useful periodically. It may not be all that frequently, but we probably ought to just be aware of what the pension board is telling us.
Yes, thank you for that.
Sorry, Chair. I think I've just got an observation for me.
Just wanted to say that in terms of the pension report, that is done only once a year. And apart from the economical assumptions, there will be things like, for example, of assumptions of longevity of people, of the staff, how long they would live for, interest rates and things like that. So there are lots and lots of assumptions there that are included. And it is quite heavy reading, but again, it will be good to actually maybe explore explaining it further.
In my experience, Chairman, 26, no, actually longer than that, because I've been on 2 county councils. In my experience, the actuaries always are on the side of pessimism.
They're accountants, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions from any? Yes,
I think I've been lax, so I don't know whether there's any way around this. The audit reports which come in under Appendix A, at what point would they be discussed in today's meeting? In Appendix A. Page 22.
Are you referring to page
20?
Are you talking about page 22, the audit?
Gary's going to be dealing with later.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, that's the next agenda item.
Okay. Me too.
Right. Any other questions on the statement of accounts? I should just like to say, I know there's not many people, I don't think, listening, but the training we did have just before this meeting started on how to understand the statement of accounts was particularly useful and may have reduced the number of questions. Thank you. So it's resolved that we should note the statement of accounts. Those in favour? Thank you. Agenda item 7. So we're expecting at least one question from Councillor Thomas. The internal audit report to June 2022. Mr. Angel.
Thanks, Chair. This is my normal quarterly report. This one updates members on the internal activity in the first quarter of 2022-23, the progress made on implementing outstanding audit recommendations, and a little progress update on the arrangements for our next external quality assessment. On the summary of audit activity, which is in paragraph 3 onwards on page 19, in summary, we've issued 2 reports in the first quarter of 2022-23. As usual, the executive summaries are in the appendix on page 22 onwards. These audits were procurement and capital programme. Now, both of them received a limited assurance rating because of the reasons outlined in the report, and I'm sure we'll discuss that in a bit. Implementation of audit recommendations. Progress outstanding on the audit recommendations has been followed up, and the current position is shown in Appendix B, which is page 28. In summary, the number of long outstanding audit recommendations is now reduced from 3 to 2, and the progress on the recommendations made in 21-22, last financial year, it continues to be good. Finally, the bit on the external quality assessment. As I've told members before, the Rother internal audit team is required to have an external quality assessment every 5 years to comply with our professional standards. This review is now due. I've therefore met with audit colleagues at Hastings, Lewis and Eastbourne and Wilden, and audit colleagues I say, and we have agreed to carry out reciprocal peer reviews to meet this requirement. It's a similar arrangement to what we did 5 years ago, but that included East and West Sussex. This time it's just going to be authorities from East Sussex. Relevance review will be undertaken by the Chief Internal Auditors at Lewis and Eastbourne and Hastings. Since writing my report, the timing of the review has now been firmed up. It's scheduled to take place in Q4 and the week commencing the 23rd of January. With everything now arranged, I won't have any further progress updates to report until after this work's completed. I'm hoping it will get finished in time for me to report the outcome at our March meeting. That's it then now. I'll happily take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Hello there. I was thinking that this particular part of the audit report should be signalled by alarm bells ringing, because these two items contain some extremely worrying sentences. So if we take a look at Appendix A on page 24, this is where you say the overall level of assurance is limited. And you go on to say, you get an N for individual budgets within the capital programme are closely monitored. And if I'm right, you sampled a certain number, didn't you, and found problems with those, is that right?
Right. Yeah, we didn't sample a certain number. We talked to project managers and to finance staff and that to find out what the procedures were for monitoring. We found it was a little bit short for what it should be, really. I should emphasise that Chief Financial Officer was aware there was a problem here, and he asked us to carry out this audit. So that's all been, I think it's all been useful to try and get things back up to speed. But yeah, no, well, it wasn't sampling as such. It was just talking to people and finding out what they do. And I think you're talking of the capital programme audit here. All the recommendations here. I mean, the monitoring of expenditure, which at the top, it really is, and communication is sort of fundamental to most of these things that go below it, really, because project slippage not being communicated. Regular meetings would identify what grants are coming in and when. Currency of the capital programme, with more regular contact, you'd know if things were live projects or not. So I think communication is a significant part of all of this, and hopefully Tony, Chief Financial Officer, will be able to assure us that they'll now be taken to put that right. So.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that this was discovered by internal audit, which shows that the processes of the council are working to actually identify problem areas. But what does worry me is the extent of this problem as described here, because some of these descriptions really are quite forthright. So, for example, on page 25, you say, there is currently no effective communication between project managers and finance to promptly identify and report actual and potential project overspends within the capital programme. And there are other sentences on that page which are probably equally concerning. And so I think there is a question to what extent this, whatever you might call it, laxity, is prevalent throughout the council, because you can see that if these procedures are not being followed, there is at least the possibility that errors are creeping in, which could cost the council taxpayers sums of money, probably considerable sums of money, and it applies even more to the next one, doesn't it, when we get to that. So I'm just sort of thinking to myself that if I was part of an organisation that came up with this, what I would personally do is to say, let's have an absolutely thorough investigation throughout the entire council in order to discover just how prevalent this problem is and what is the gravity of it. So is there going to be some kind of follow-up, some further investigation to ensure that these procedures are being tightened up so we can get an assurance that these kind of errors have been eliminated? It's obviously, can I obviously point out, this is not a criticism of the auditors, who've done a fantastic job in uncovering the problem.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, just to respond to some of those points. The first thing I want to point out is that actually the audit, as Mr. Angel has pointed out, was instigated by myself, because we knew there were issues with monitoring. But I do want to put a bit of context around this, because I think it's important. It's not excusing it, but I think to use the phrase laxity is not correct in this instance, and I'll explain why. We haven't. Well, the first thing I think I'd like to make is actually since the report has been produced, we have already started addressing some of the recommendations, and we have augmented and redirected resources to deal with capital monitoring. So we have reacted very quickly, knowing that there was an issue there. I think until now, COVID, as we mentioned earlier, COVID has drastically slowed the pace of the capital programme down. So the issue of, or the risk of money being wasted as a result of poor monitoring, I don't believe has really been that prevalent, if at all. I should also point out that in the capital programme, the biggest projects in the capital programme, even during the pandemic, were the delivery of the property investment strategy and purchase of properties, and also the temporary accommodation project, purchase of temporary accommodation units. Now, both of those, particularly the property investment strategy, have been subject to rigorous appraisal and reporting. In fact, the property investment strategy goes through the property investment panel, which involves members. So, whilst I agree that the monitoring hasn't been perfect or as well as it should be, and we recognise that, it's not that the capital programme was left to rotten ruin and nothing was done with it at all. The big items in that programme, such as the property investment strategy and the temporary accommodation purchases, have been monitored, and they've also undergone, every purchase we've done has undergone a rigorous appraisal process and has gone through the due governance process. So I think it's very important to understand that, Chair, and I do need to bring that to the committee's attention. The other thing that we have also improved, or started to improve, is communication with the Corporate Programme Board. There is still work to do. We're not complacent, but we have started mending those issues as well. The other thing that I would just want to finish up on is that we're also doing an affordability review of the capital programme, and that will pick up things like slippage, which was mentioned earlier in the meeting. That will form part of the affordability review, which will feed into the medium-term financial planning process. So I think a little bit of context is needed around this, because it isn't great, and we knew it wasn't a great situation, but we have, where we've needed to, we've managed the big ticket items, if you like, and I think we've managed those well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baden. Just going to say, Councillor Thomas, I think the sampling was the procurement audit, not the capital. Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, I really want to focus on the capital side. I just wondered if our internal audit, and I recognise that they were asked to undertake this investigation, whether they established that this is a recent phenomenon, or is it a long-standing phenomenon? In other words, is this something that went wrong because of the change of priorities during COVID? Or is it more systematic than that? I also think that maybe this is something that you and Tony could look at. It would have been good to have, I did find a notion later on that action already been taken on some of this, but it wasn't spelled out for us what the response was and what had been done and what was still outstanding. And I would have found that helpful, because what we've got is a diagnosis of a problem. We're told somewhere in rather general terms that it's already being addressed. But I think I would have liked to know much more on this committee about how it was being addressed and how much had been sorted already.
Thank you. Yes. I can see. I don't know how that would have gone, if it would have been Appendix C or something, but I think very much that would have helped. And Tony and I will get together on that.
Sorry, Chair, if I may add, yes. I mean, Gary, you presumably, I don't know whether the head of internal audit, you do a follow-up audit to this. I think recommendations will be followed up in due course, but Yeah, I can add no more to than what I've already said. But yeah, we can go into it in a little bit more detail. That's not a problem.
If he doesn't automatically do a follow-up audit, I think we'll be asking for one. Councillor Chopin.
I was going to say that now that we're engaging on a very large capital programme, this becomes absolutely crucial, and it's going to be a very big risk over the next few years, and therefore I think we do need quite a lot of assurance that these problems have been addressed, what the new system is and how it's working. I think this is probably one of the biggest risks we're going to face.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree with that, and that's why the issue was flagged by myself to the head of internal audit.
Thank you. Councillor Langlands.
Thank you. Yes, I was looking at page 19 with procurement, and the audit findings highlighted the need for greater, this is interesting, awareness of or compliance. So that sort of suggests training, awareness of, because maybe some people really haven't been aware of what they need to do, or compliance with the procurement procedural rules. I mean, have we addressed that? Have we done any training in that? Because my concern is an awful lot of money can be lost through procurement that we could perhaps claw back if we're doing it correctly.
Mr. Bateman.
Thank you again, Chair. I mean, the first thing I should say is that as a finance department, or procurement's part of my remit, but I can only do the sort of in the round bit. I can't. I can oversee and try and ensure that procurement processes are followed and adhered to. But I'm also very much in the lap of my colleagues across the council to ensure that procurement is done properly. But to address the point that you've made, Councillor Langlands, the procurement strategy does include training for officers and members, and I'm talking to the East Sussex Procurement Hub, not literally as we speak, but I have been talking to them about updating that strategy, giving a progress update on that strategy, and starting to deliver training for officers and members across the council. We're aware of the procurement issues. We've reported them before. We've discussed them before, so we are aware of it, and we're trying our best to make sure that the issues identified in the report are being addressed.
Thank you. Mr. Farmer.
You'll bear with me, Mr. Chairman. I have a number of questions for Gary on this issues, as you can see. The first one, in view of the audit on the capital programme, you suggest, Gary, that you will carry out audits on projects next year. In view of what's been found, can it wait till next year? Should it not have a greater priority?
Well, we've got planned work for the rest of the year, that's the trouble, but if members feel strongly enough that it needs to be revisited again this year, we can discuss about what audits we can drop, yeah. So it's not, we could do it if people want us to do it, yeah.
Okay. My second question is, in terms of the purchasing, which you've already alluded to, looking at your report, the rules to be followed seem very straightforward and clear. It's not as if they're very complex. There's, at this level you should do this, at this level you should do that. If people aren't complying with that, is that not a disciplinary matter? Should that not come through HR as a disciplinary matter if people aren't following procurement rules?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I don't think, I think there's a bit of culture change that needs to go on here. And I think there's a little bit of enforcement of the training and managers actually managing this. So I think before we get into disciplinaries around this, we really need to have the opportunity to make sure it's well embedded and the relationship with the procurement hub, make sure that's working well. So there's quite a lot to explore, I think, before you get to that stage. But there is a cultural problem here. And I think this is one that needs our attention at senior leadership group. And I think it's one
that our managers kind of need to own and support us in making sure it actually happens, which I think is what Gary was saying. I think on the capital programme, if I may, I think we need to let the way that we are managing the capital programme kind of bed in and make sure it's working. The thing that Tony didn't mention was senior leadership team is far more involved in that now and making sure when projects come through, we're sort of well aware of any issues and any change in projects. And so I think that, in addition to the other sort of measures in place, will kind of make a real difference there. And I think perhaps we should let that run and make sure, we've got the checks and balances in place. We're sort of very much on our radar now. So I'd suggest that, sort of taking audit time this year to look at it might not be the right course of action, and we should really let those measures bed in. Thank you.
Okay, one final question, if I may, Chair. On your external audit that the council, the Sussex County Council, I think you're going to use them to audit us, and we will do the same with them. The only point I would make that members may consider is that it is unlikely, I would say, that audit teams from another council, shall we say, are going to be very careful about criticising someone else they're auditing on the basis that it's a quid pro quo, and that they will not want to take the risk that they will then be looked at very hard if you've done a bad report on them. You say that it would cost £9,000 for an independent audit. That seems a very small amount of money in total to give this committee assurance that internal audit is operating as it should do.
That's a fair point, but auditors have got a duty to comport themselves in a certain way, and there's a whole list of things that they have to check, that the assessment team have to check us against, and it's either pass or fail, and they will report on that. So I think there's enough structure to it for them to give a fair assessment of where we are at. I know anecdotally, one of the auditors that did it, one of the West Sussex Council last time, he had to appear at their committee meeting, and they gave him a bit of a rough ride for what he found. So maybe he wasn't giving them an easy ride there, but
I think I'm thinking more of perception than actuality. I think we have a lot of faith in your team and you in what you do. So it wasn't a personal jibe, but just a reputational issue that if people look at it and say, well, this wasn't really independent. And I just don't think £9,000 is that much money for the council to spend on ensuring that their audit, internal audit, is to the best standard.
Thank you. I'd probably suggest we give them the opportunity to do it first, and then if we're not satisfied, go to the independent one next time. But I think in the same way that our audit has found, well, I know they will look, because they're doing each other a service, they are pointing out what's wrong, they are finding out. It's not scoring points off each other, they are actually going to be helping us to find out our audit. So I would say we probably should stick with that external-internal arrangement until perhaps it comes back to this committee and we go, oh, hang on, we're not happy with this. I've seen you, Councillor Cortell. Mr. Ray.
Yeah, I mean, last review, they raised quite a few points. I mean, none of them were serious things, because no one has time to do everything perfectly. We don't have the resources, but I think it was about 6 or 7 recommendations last time, most of which we took on board, and it all enhances the service. I'm fairly confident we're doing quite a good job, but I probably would say that. But let someone else give their opinion. I'll take your point that it could be perceived we're all marking each other's homework and we're giving each other an easy ride, but I don't think that will be the case, because there will be 2 heads of audit on each team, and they will be looking at it to make sure that they're consistent in their approach and things like that. So I think that's a wise suggestion from the chair, that we see how this turns out, and if you're not happy with it, we can look to get a different approach. Ideally, I would have liked West Sussex to have audited East Sussex again and things like that, because we're further apart and we've got not that we've got much connection with the councils that are audit-wise, with the ones that are going to do us, but unfortunately they're all joined audit partnerships and things now, so they're all being picked off, and there's not many individual players now, so that wouldn't have worked this time. So,
thank you. Councillor Cottel.
My feeling is one of perception rather than fact. From what I'm reading in these reports, Gary Angle has done a pretty good job. My concern is more looking at the headlines. What might Joe Bloggs think, member of the public, concerning this arrangement? It's a matter not that it won't be done well, but that it doesn't feel right superficially. And I would personally prefer to see it done externally.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
I reinforce that argument. I think Councillor Cottel has made a very good point there, that it's also a matter of public confidence that's an important issue. It strikes me that this difficulty can be looked at under various headings. We could look at it under an individual heading, and we could say, if a particular procurement policy hasn't been followed, is it because the person didn't know the procurement policy in the first place? Secondly, could it be because they knew the policy but didn't think it was important? Thirdly, could they have disregarded the policy because they disagreed with it? Fourthly, could they not followed it because it was more convenient and time-consuming not to do so? So it's more information, I think, would be interesting. A second heading would be managerial. What responsibility do managers have for this? How aware were they of this problem? Have any steps been taken previously to deal with it? And what exactly are the steps that will be taken in the future to deal with it? And the third heading is structural. These difficulties may not be the responsibility of individuals when you look more deeply. They might be structural. They might be created by staff shortages, lack of time, the importance of carrying out other tasks instead, urgency, timetabling urgency. We've got to get it done in a very short time frame. Maybe pressure from the government that you will lose this funding unless you do it by this stage. You know, there are all kinds of structural issues which might lie behind this, and I think they'll be worth looking at too. Is a staff shortage contributing to it, for example? Is it a lack of financing? I think we could look at it under different headings, and I think there's an awful lot we could learn if we really looked a little bit more under the microscope.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. It's my thinking time now.
I think as part of the monitoring of the recommendations around, we're talking about the procurement audit, we can take account of some of those headings, and in our response and update, we can dig a bit deeper perhaps in some areas. I'm not sure if Gary has any of that information that form the background of the audit already, but we can certainly...
I can supply some information on that. Well, some of them will certainly fall into those headings that you said there. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I thought there must be quite a lot of information behind this two-page that we've got. So thank you for that. I'm also thinking there was a suggestion by Mr. Farmer, I'm not sure how this progresses, about doing the follow-up audit sooner rather than later on the capital. I know you said you've got work programmed in, and then the suggestion was, of course, that we should give it time to bed in. And so I'm thinking, do we need a proposal that, rather than begin it, start looking at projects from next year, the audit should start in January, sort of, you know, do we hurry it up from that point of view with a suggestion that we look at the capital programme audit again, starting in January, which gives you time to possibly reschedule what work you've got done there, if we think that's valuable, but someone would need to suggest it rather than me, possibly, and we could add it to this adoption of the report. What I should have said earlier was, on all the others, I should get a proposal and second, and I will on this one, because it's audit. But thoughts on asking Gary to repeat the audit on capital programmes starting in January? Any thoughts on that? Councillor Barnes.
The only real problem with that, and I think it's probably outweighed by the advantages of moving sooner rather than later, is what else would go out of the audit plan. And I'd welcome Gary's views on relative priorities. What I would like is a full response from the management side as to how they've responded. That would seem to me there's a real wake-up call, and I think having that report early would be very useful. I personally think that we've got rather a tight audit plan. I would probably wait till the start of the new financial year, but give it high priority at the start of the new financial year.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're just about entering the period of doing the governance audits now, and which are the mostly main financial systems which the external auditors can rely on to do their work. I mean, we do them every year, and I'm already thinking of downsizing a few of them because we've got a member of my team on long-term sick at the moment, so we're down to two people at the moment. I mean, we are planning to do a look at the project work in that, which we can program to be sort of April, saying next financial year, which will give it the other side of the picture, I guess. Because this is purely from the finance. So the capital program is purely from the finance perspective. We spoke in the audit. We spoke to some project managers to get their views on what communication was going on, how often they discuss things with finance, things like that. But it was purely on the finance side. The other side of the picture is all what's happening on the projects, which I can't really give a good any insight into. We haven't looked at any in depth. So that was the thinking about looking at that one first. Of course, all the major projects will be on the capital programme as well. So, I'm a bit in two minds about it, really. I mean, capital programme follow-up. The capital programme audit, we could do a follow-up on it. We could probably do a briefer audit than we did that time, because we could just be, going the checklist of the points you found last time to make sure that there's something in place to address those now. That's one way of doing it, to have a briefer audit, which might mean we can prioritise a bit sooner. But I think, as Councillor Barnes indicated, something's got to give if we're going to do it this year. And members are going to have to be happy that we won't be able to do some of the programme governance audits if we do it. So I'll be guided by.
I think I've kind of come for taking Councillor Barnes' point about the management, and they're now monitoring it, and getting a report from the monitoring rather than deflect you from audit, because if it's being monitored, that's as good as being, it's halfway to auditing, isn't it? So I'm going to bring you in now.
That's basically what I was going to say. The capital programme will go through a monitoring process itself, so perhaps we can include, these measures are actually being implemented and a management response as part of the capital programme monitoring, rather than doing another audit. But just we have other process there to check that it's all working, checks and balances in place.
Oh yeah, go on, Tony.
I didn't really have anything new to add, Chair. I mean, I agree. I have, for my money, I don't think that it's necessary to do a follow-up audit quite so soon. You need, as Lorna said earlier, it would be good to give it time to bed down. We have started addressing it. Take Councillor Barnes' point that it would be good to know a bit more detail, and absolutely understand that and agree with that. But we have started to address it. We're improving the reporting itself, the monitoring reports themselves. So, action has already been taken. We knew that the problem was there. So I think to embark on a follow-up audit quite so soon after the main report itself, possibly possibly too soon. We're so, as a CFO, I'm acutely aware of the issues around the capital monitoring. I would like to say it's a finance issue with a small f, not with a big F. It's a council-wide responsibility, but clearly we have a major role to play in that. We need to improve that. As I say, I've gone through some of the measures. I've outlined some of the measures that we've already taken to do that. But yeah, I think a follow-up audit so soon wouldn't be overly productive.
Thank you. So I'm now trying to work out where we've got to. Sorry, Councillor Langland.
Sorry, just a quick addition to that, because I can see on the currency of capital programme, page 25, that the Chief Finance Officer should liaise with senior management on at least an annual basis to consider removing projects or legacy projects. I mean, could that not happen a bit sooner? On an annual basis seems a little bit sort of a long time, and that might bring forward some of the things that you want to address on the projects a little bit sooner, and you can be monitoring that better.
Thank you. Mr. Bailey.
If I may, Chair, 2 points to that. I agree, on an annual basis is too infrequent. We do, as Lorna also pointed out earlier, we now report the capital monitoring to senior leadership team on a monthly basis, along with the revenue monitoring. That wasn't done before. We've been doing that for several months now, but it is still a fairly new thing that we've brought in. So we are doing that. And as I mentioned, I think I mentioned it earlier today when we were doing the statement of accounts report. I might have been during the training session, but the affordability of the capital programme is also something that we're picking up as part of the medium-term financial planning process. And that affordability process, that affordability review, if you like, is going to address whether they're, especially in light of the current financial predicament that the country finds itself in, that affordability review will take on board some pretty stiff challenges, certainly with regards to inflation and energy costs. So it is going to be addressed, as you've alluded to, Councillor Langlands. It's going to be addressed as part of the medium-term financial planning process, and I can't say what that looks like at the moment because there's an awful lot of information to throw into the machine and turn the wheel, but it will come out in the next couple of months when we report to overview and cabinet.
Thank you. I'm sure members will point out if I'm wrong, but I think we've come down to the fact that the procurement audit is being dealt with by training and extra work on that with the staff, and to some extent that isn't that important that we get it in our work programme for March, because we've only got 2 more meetings, December and March. But I'm thinking that we do want, bear in mind they've started monitoring the capital programme and Tony's already going to the SLT monthly, that we should aim for an update in December or wait until March, but we could actually ask for an update on that monitoring of the capital programme, whereas the procurement can take a little bit slower in that it's being dealt with training and through the management team anyway. Sorry, yes, Tony.
If I just had one more thing, which hopefully gives a small bit of assurance on the procurement audit. As a finance department, we do monitor compliance with the purchase order, raising of purchase orders. So it's not that whilst the particular issues picked up in the audit don't look good, we are monitoring it, and it's not. I don't think it's not wholesale across the council that nobody raises a purchase order. We do monitor the situation, and we try to enforce it as much as we can. Again, we can only do so much, but we are proactive in trying to monitor that situation and make sure that people do raise purchase orders.
Councillor Kirby-Green.
Yeah, sorry, I was only going to say, following up from our independent member or person that sits, sorry, I've forgotten your name, it slips off my tongue, but you made a comment about we can only do so much, but surely it comes back to that is what people are meant to do. That is their job, surely. And I understood Lorna's comment when she said, you don't want to go into disciplinary straight away. You need to make sure there's a culture change. But I was slightly alarmed when you say there's only too much one can do, because that is the job that the person has to do. So surely they have to do it. I don't mean to be harsh, but people should be raising purchase orders, presumably. So I don't understand. Your comments just alarm me a bit, Tony, but maybe it's not the way you meant it to sound.
Well, let's see if you can rephrase it. Tony.
I'll try and rephrase it, Chair. We do as I say, level of monitoring to monitor enforcement, but it is the responsibility of the budget holders to place purchase orders, and that's the bit I'm trying to get to. So there's a dual role here. It's not just a finance role to make sure people raise purchase orders. It's the role of the budget holders and service managers to do that. We, if you like, act as sort of policemen with a small p in ensuring that happens. And I think for the most part we do. But clearly there are one or two areas where it's a slip through. But it's a dual responsibility. I need to emphasise that. So it's not that there's lots of things slipping through the net because finance haven't done things properly. That's not the case.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, I think Tony has just explained my understanding of the situation. What is clearly going wrong is a managerial failure. And while I don't believe in resorting instantly to discipline, I think you do need to keep discipline in the background because we do put enormous store by budget holders and budget holders acting properly. And I agree with Lorna, I think it's got to be a culture shift, and it's pretty urgent, I would imagine.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Cortell.
Moving back to the other issue about the auditing of internal audit, Councillor Thomas and myself both seem to feel that maybe an external organisation should carry it out for the sake of perception on the outside. I wondered how other councillors felt about that.
Councillor Barnes?
Although I've got a lot of sympathy with the perception point, and it can be misleading. If we've got any spare cash at the moment, I would rather actually strengthen internal audit by taking account of the fact they are one down on a permanent basis. We've brought in consultants in planning. I don't really want to bring in a consultant, but if we could find some way of actually giving Gary greater guns at the moment, a third person, I think we should be exploring that.
I just say, it's like I said in the report, £9,000. That would actually, I've only got one estimate from outside, but it was actually more than 9.5, I think it was in the end. And I haven't got that money. I haven't got a budget for that. So money would have to be found somewhere for it. I don't want to mislead you on some long-term sick of my team. Hopefully she'll be back within the next month or so. But for the medium time, we're down one. So.
Thank you. I think there's a simple way to sort that one, which is take a vote on that in a moment to see if we want to stay with the internal, external, or pay for an external. Sorry, Councillor Thompson.
No, to say I think I'm persuaded by Councillor Barnes' argument.
But we can still have the discussion on it. But yes, thank you. Thank you. It's the way you hold your glasses, Councillor Mandy. I always think you're poised to put your hand up. This is why I do that double look at you every time, because I think... Sorry. So let's, on that point, before we move to the whole point, how do I phrase it? Those in favour of seeking an external review of our audit department. Was that? basically what you're saying? Well, that's one less vote. Thank you. I will deal with the question of the monitoring report on the capital. I think we'll deal with that under the work schedule rather than making it a particular item now. So I would like someone, you're doing it with your pen now, Councillor Langlands. I would like someone to propose that we accept, that we note this report on audit. I need a proposer and seconder. Sorry.
Subject to anything that a response will come from.
Yes, and I will put that on the work. We'll try and get that on the work programme so there's a definite date for them coming back with it. Yes. So, all those in favour? Thank you. The duo here. Councillor Thomas and Councillor John Barnes. Right, agenda 8, item 8. Mr. Angel, you're still back on. You're still on the hook. Risk management update, Mr. Angel.
Thank you, Chair. I've been doing 6 monthly updates on risk management, and this is 6 months since the last one. I'm afraid that it's rather a long report, this one, because I wanted to get in there all the essence of all the improvements we've been trying to make to the process since the last update in March. The report starts by outlining the recent activity. That's to refresh the corporate risk register and to determine the council's risk appetite, which is a new thing for us. It then goes on to incorporate the knowledge gained from these exercises into a new risk management policy and the new look corporate risk register. So recent activity, as outlined in the report on paragraph 5 onwards, this section explains the work we undertook in partnership with our insurance provider, Zurich. It includes the use of anonymous feedback surveys to obtain the views on key strategic risks, which went to officers, and determine the level of risk the council should be willing to accept in pursuit of its corporate objectives. All the members in this room will have received that. Each survey was closely followed up by a face-to-face workshop to discuss the results and determine how best to use them and to shape our processes moving forward. This then leads us nicely onto the new policy, which is mentioned in paragraph 8 onwards. The new risk management policy can be found in Appendix A, page 35. It incorporates our new approach to identifying and assessing strategic risks and a section on how we propose to define the council's risk appetite. I'd like to draw your particular attention to the draft risk appetite statements on page 47, which is the Appendix 3 of the policy. Members will need to be satisfied with the wording of these statements prior to the policy being reported to full council for adoption. Obviously, you could all argue over the particular wording in it, but as long as you're broadly happy with the essence of what the statements make, because two different people will probably come up with slightly different things, so it's as long as you're happy with what it says there. The corporate risk register, which mentioned in paragraph 13 onwards, this is something I'll report every 6 months. The new updated corporate risk register can be found in Appendix B, which is pages 51 and 52. Those of you who will be familiar with the previous one will notice it's changed a little bit. It's undergone further enhancements since the last update, many of which are listed in the report. When I last reported the corporate risk register, it contained 38 risks. Following the risk register refresh exercise, this was reduced to 22, made up of 10 new risks come up with at the workshop and 12 existing risks. The contents of the risk register has since been reviewed again by the risk owners, and after merging certain risks, the final count is now 16, so we've gone from 38 to 16. The number of risks in the risk register should therefore be far easier for officers to manage moving forward. In the new risk register, the cause and effect of each risk is more clearly defined, and the inherent or untreated risk score which previously appeared on the left-hand side of the table, has now been removed to avoid any confusion as to the current level of risk. It's also to make way for a targeted score, which will add another colourful column in at the end, so you can see what the mitigated risk is now and what the future risk where we should be aiming. The report outlines proposed improvements in the pipeline. One of them, as I've just mentioned, is the target risk. So that will help flag any, once the risk appetite has been agreed, that will then flag anything that's above our risk appetite. So something should be within the amber colour, and we've got a red. You can see instantly that it needs to be mitigated. More mitigation is required. I also plan to include the dates of the last and next review in future ones, so members can see movement if things are being, if risks are being mitigated and move forward. So that concludes my brief overview of the report, but hopefully members of this committee will be happy with the improvements made to date and willing to recommend the content of the new risk management policy to full council. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Angel. Just before I come to Councillor John Barnes, I'd just like to say no need to apologise for a large report. I found this report easy to read, very simple to follow, and was very an excellent report. So thank you. Don't apologise for that. Thank you. Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, I echo our thanks to Gary for coordinating this new effort and for everybody who's taken part in it. My one worry is that we are underestimating certain risks, and my second worry, which I want to spend a little time on, is whether we're wise always to have merged what we've merged. An instance really of the first one is number 3 on the list. I'm not sure whether these are intended to be in numerical order in terms of seriousness, but certainly it seems to me that with energy costs and inflation both extraordinarily high, the economic risk is understated, and that clearly is going to pose major problems for our budgeting. It may also have some impact on our staff. So I personally am not happy with the way those two risks are actually posed at the moment. I think they are both more serious. They may well ease next year. Inflation is clearly not going to go on forever unless we try and always meet the cost of living with wage increases equivalent to the cost of living. Then you would build in a wage price spiral. But so long as we pay less than the cost of living, sooner or later, that will squeeze. And of course, monetary rates are going to go up. I'm pretty sure they will go at least as far as 5%. And that will also pose further financial problems for this council. So I really am not happy with either 3 at the moment, and there may be some implications when we come down to the people headings. An example of the other one, which really does trouble me, is the way we've lumped housing problems together, some of which are actually insoluble. The land supply problem, we are not going to solve. But we've lumped it together with things that we should be able to solve. The number of affordable houses, for example, what we're doing about temporary accommodation for the homeless. Those are within our grasp to solve. By throwing in the land supply problem and some of the planning consequences that come from that, we're lumping chalk and cheese together. And it seems to me that whole area needs to be looked at. It is one of our major areas, and to lump it all into one heading as if the risks were identical seems to me crazy.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Mr. Farmer.
I think first I'd like to say I've been involved in risk management quite a lot during my career and as a governor, and this new policy that's come forward I think is really very good. You know, it's a step up from what you were doing before, and is clearly a very good policy. To the specifics, the risk appetite, I have some concerns that the high-risk categories, particularly on projects and programme risk, in view of what's been looked at in the audit, to say that we will take a high-risk approach on projects and programmes seems to me stretching the risk appetite. I think more caution should be applied. And the second thing is, in light of our previous concern on governance of the Rother District Council Housing Company, which we raised a lot at the last meeting, I'm surprised it is not included on the risk register. In fact, I specifically raised the issue at the last meeting and was assured by the Chief Executive that when the new risk register came out, it would be on it. But it appears nowhere. So there's my two issues.
Thank you. I don't suppose Lorna knows anything about what the Chief Exec has said, but we need to definitely query that one, because I think it's quite reasonable for you to bring that up. I'm just thinking to myself out loud here about how we deal with like that before we then approve, or how we put that into the resolution so that we can move on to deal with it rather than have it come back again in December come March time. I'm just wondering how we deal with that, because that's a valid point. And also some discussion over the fact that you think the project is too high, and I'd welcome a discussion on that. Councillor Barnes.
I think probably, and it's probably important to break this discussion into a number of small motions, which can be recommendations to the senior management team, that they look at this as a separate risk and include it.
I must admit, previously, quite a few meetings back, I raised the issue that it was very odd, it seemed to me very odd as an independent person, that the minutes that come out of this meeting never have any actions, and there is never any follow-up at the next meeting about those outstanding actions. And at the time, the chair was going to follow up on that, but I don't think anything's happened. And it does seem a very strange way to minute meetings and to run meetings, not to have actions that come out the meeting, which are then followed up as actions arising at subsequent meetings. Because my experience of governance is that that's how it operates in most organisations.
Thank you. On that matter in particular, Mr. Angel, Mr. Baden, Councillor Thomas, Vice Chair, and I are meeting next week to discuss just generally the committee and where we go. So that will definitely be taken care of. We'll have that discussion next week, I think. Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
To make a remark relating to the Rother District Housing Company because of my interest here or not?
Yes, you've declared it. I see no reason not. But you might want to run it past Councillor Barnes before you do.
So this is just an observation, okay? And it is simply that in the present economic climate, housing is intrinsically a high-risk activity because we have no way of knowing exactly what way the housing market will move in subsequent years. The question of how the interest rate will move, even in the next week, is something we can't be very certain about. And so the impact upon the enormous amount of economic uncertainty there is, both in the national situation and in the international situation, does definitely make it an area where prediction is very difficult to accomplish, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you. Do I see your hand up? Yeah, Councillor Cortell.
I think that possibly one omission from the risk register is the effect on staff costs of the current cost of living, of the current energy crisis, and that is something that's bubbling in another sphere, and I don't know whether perhaps that should be something which CMT, I believe, might consider adding to the risk register.
Thank you. Have you seen, I'm just looking now, where possibly is there a category that could go under as an additional item? I was just... Okay, yeah, I was just looking to see if it could be a 16A or if, but yes, okay, thank you. Right, taking, sorry, Councillor Thomas.
A different subject. I'm interested in, I don't know much about it, the whole business of digital transformation. And that's something which is very much in the air at the moment. Many councils are getting involved in this. And I noticed that Cambridge University has got an interesting course on this subject. And it would be interesting to send maybe somebody connected with this council on that course to try to find out what the ideas are there, and so we can get an idea of what sort of approaches are the most likely to yield fruit, and which ones are high risk, and so on. So what I'm interested in is, in this excellent document, by the way, I think it's wonderful, I enjoyed it very much. Not something one necessarily says about documents, but I thought it was an excellent read. But if we look at page 44, when it comes to technology, all the risks are about using it. Whereas with technology, one of the biggest risks is not using it, and therefore missing out, on things that might improve the quality of the services or the efficiency with which they're delivered. So I just wonder whether it might be possible to write something in on page 44 under technology to register the fact that there's a risk in not using it as there is in using it. I don't know what you think on that.
Laura.
On that one in particular, the technology one, it was also, it wasn't just about how we use transformation as a means to deliver our services, but also how we keep the council safe and cyber security and that side of it. And I do wonder with this one whether there's kind of the security side of things versus the digital transformation, and is it worth a discussion back to CMT just to make sure we've got that statement right? Because a couple of people have said to me, is that right? But I think it's also about perhaps not being absolutely at the forefront of testing something completely new. You kind of want to be in that second tranche to make sure it works. But does that kind of reflect it? Is it just a matter of tweaking of wording there? Or is it the score itself that you feel is kind of not quite right? So I guess, and it comes back to the other risks that you'd quite like to see in the corporate risk register as well. If there's things that you think are missing, I wonder whether perhaps the recommendation could be that we actually, and you're looking at me, Gary, you're frowning, but we take it, I know you can't face it, but take it back to CMT and just check and make sure that, I mean, the point of bringing it here is to make sure we've got it right. So if there is something that you feel is particularly missing and something you'd expect to see in there, then we can take that back and have a look at it. Otherwise, we're sort of changing this policy on the hoof without any, thought. Now, it might be that we decide actually it's a very good reason and we can come back and report that. But I welcome Gary's views on how we do that process.
As to the content of it, I'll not my gig. You know, I'm trying to be independent from this. I'm just trying to facilitate it, and this is what's come out of the workshops. I mean, certainly the risk appetite one. All the members were surveyed. I think at least half, probably more than half, replied. And all the senior staff in CMT were surveyed, and most of them replied as well. And this was there, and at the workshop, this is what they felt was the way forward. So it was consensus of the people there at the time. But there've been some very valid points made here, some of which weren't raised in the workshop. So I think it's fair enough. We should review it again, but I don't know quite how that's going to fit in with then getting this up to council for approval. So because presumably this committee will want to know what we've changed before we put it up. So I'm not sure on that one.
Indeed, you took the words right out of my mouth. And while we give Lorna time to think about how. Councillor John Ball.
Yes, I certainly don't think we should take decisions on the hoof. So I'm going to move a recommendation that we re-examine the economic risks in the light of inflation and the current level of energy prices. That's A. B, that risk 2 is reassessed, because I think we've lumped too much together. I genuinely think, and I can't see how we really are going to do much mitigation to the land supply problem, whereas I think we ought to be able to mitigate the other risks by action that is within our control. My final suggestion, which really I look to Councillor Thomas, and this isn't a recommendation, this is simply a point. When I look at item 9, one of the mitigations for the lack of quality staff is actually, can we improve the productivity of staff by using new technology? And that would seem to me a more appropriate place to put it in than as a risk.
Thank you. I'm relying on Louise doing lots of note-taking here, because I was going to come up with a list of which I see your 3 as starters, and we may have some other suggestions to add to that. Specifically, I know Mr. Farmer brought up the programme risk as being open, which is high risk, and perhaps we ask for someone to look at that again in view of the procurement finding or the audit finding on projects. That was that one. I was thinking also the Rother Housing Company was brought up. Whether I don't know if that can go under housing or if it needs its own one. I think it possibly needs. I think it probably needs its own one. Yeah, but well, stop me if I'm wrong, that we think the Rother Housing Company should be on there as a risk register, on the risk register. The suggested number 17 was specifically on the cost of living. That was you, Councillor Purcell, wasn't it? The cost of living and energy prices. Do we think that needs to be on there specifically as a 17, incorporated somewhere else, or just reviewed again by the CMT? Councillor Thomas.
On this particular point, on one particular point, I strongly hold with you that we should not change the risk rating in relation to housing, because otherwise I think we may be in a position where we would draw back from doing things that would help the council to achieve its overall objectives in terms of the environment, in terms of providing housing, in helping affordable housing to be delivered. I think we're at risk of not achieving those if we change that rating. And I think it's so important to achieve those. And when we've got the actual national and international context, I just don't think there's any other rating that would be appropriate in that context.
I don't think the suggestion was to change the rating. The query I thought on the social was including the land supply, of which.
I think Chairman, I think the land supply and the planning issues should be kept separate from the housing issue. What the appropriate rating for that, I imagine it might even be higher than the one that is currently here, because it seems to me on the housing front, we can very effectively mitigate that. There may be a problem with the housing market temporarily, although again, the anticipation is it's not going to be very far. But on land supply, I don't see an easy solution unless planning is changed quite drastically to actually say we can take full account in our local plan of the fact that 90% of our land is protected.
Thank you. Dawn.
Just looking more broadly at the recommendation that we've actually got in the report, there is a recommendation to Council on the policy itself. So it's not the risk register that is going up to Council. So I think if you're broadly happy with the policy, we can still take that to Council and adopt it. It seems to me there's quite a few comments on the risk register itself that we can take back those comments and amend it. The one thing I would say is the risk register is a live thing. It changes all the time, and something dramatic happens in the economy or interest rates or something like that, and it means that we need to look at it, and it's really important, it's dynamic. So you never perfect it, and there's always ways, you know, there's always things that come into the risk register. There might be something that's escalated from a service level that doesn't appear there at the moment, but actually there's an external factor that changes things, and it's escalated up. So it's not going. It is very much. It's kind of a fixed moment in time when we did this particular version. But I do take your comments on, particularly around bringing some of them together, and I can see how actually our ability to control and mitigate is very different to different aspects of those risks. So I think we do need to take those comments back to CMT. But I think what you're saying is you like the policy itself, and we can put that forward to Council for adoption. So I just think it's important we understand what we're taking back to CMT.
I quite like that comment, except all I'm going to say is the risk appetite, is that part of policy?
Yes, it is.
Because one question was raised over the level of risk appetite for the project programme risk. Sorry, Mr. Farm.
I've got my hand up because I think it is in the same way that you review the individual risks, and obviously they change all the time. I think it should be clear that the risk appetite isn't cast in concrete in a policy. It is something that is reviewed regularly because it will change. And therefore it is as an appendix, not as the policy. So I think you can approve the policy without approving the specific appendix, because that should be open to review. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense until you try and convert it into something to say in a moment. Yes, I mean it does, because we've obviously highlighted that, and the list that Councillor Bunn started and we've added to are very much on the risk register, not on the policy. And very much the point is it's a living document. This could all stop tomorrow when something else happens that, oh, who thought that was going to happen? So I think to that extent, and it is minuted, that our concerns, so if Lorna needs to look back, she can see our concerns that we've voiced. So I'm thinking of, because this is in two parts, the officer recommendations. First of all, that the risk management policy in Appendix A be adopted. So I'd like somebody to propose and second that, please. Councillor Cortell and Councillor Thomas. Thank you. Those in favour of adopting that risk management policy, show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Thank you. Unanimous. And then the second part is that the Council's corporate risk register be noted. Well, I suppose we are noting it, but we're also saying you should review it and have a look at it. So, is it noted? Yeah, it is, isn't it? With those additions. So, Can I take the same two people as? No? Okay. Anyone like to propose that we note the corporate risk assessment, having included our concerns about it?
I was going to say, if I move to the note motion, a recommendation that certain specific risks are revisited by the senior management team.
Yes, I like that. And you second that? Thank you. All those... Sorry.
Councillor Barnes mentioned the senior management team. I was having a conversation with Mr. Angle just before the meeting, where apparently the senior management team is different from CMT, which consists a very much broader range of managers, and I would like the broader range of managers in the CMT to be included.
Very happy to accept that.
Very, very well spotted, Councillor Cortell. So,
Would you like me to explain that?
yes, please. But also, I think we've got the wording.
Yeah. Councillor Cortell's right. So we have a senior leadership team now, which comprises Tony, Malcolm, myself and Ben Hook. But we have a broader corporate management team, and we thought it was important that the risk register was owned by that group, because they're actually named in here, and it takes that, you know, it isn't just Gary that owns this risk register, it's all of the managers that come to. He doesn't own it at all, he's kind of a guardian of the process. So, no, you're absolutely right that actually it's CMT that this will go back to, and we will own. But it would go back on a regular basis in any case. I just want to make one point about the risk appetite statement. Absolutely right that should be looked at on a regular basis, and it should be checked and make sure that we're still happy and comfortable with the risk appetite statement that all statements that the council has, and we should do that and we kind of need a process for deciding how that is done, and we probably need to do that through a report either to Cabinet or as possibly back to this committee and up to council, but we need to think about how we actually make sure and check in with members to make sure that still makes sense. So that's something we'll give some thought to.
Thank you. And I've been reassured by Louise that she's got the wording that we arrived at in the end. And so that's proposed by Councillor Barnes, seconded by Councillor Thomas. All those in favour, please. Thank you. Agenda item 9, Treasury Management Update. Quarter 2. Mr. Babe.
Thank you, Chair. So members are asked to note the report. It's the regular quarterly Treasury Management Update report that we bring to Audit and Standards Committee as required by the CIPFA and DLUHC Codes of Practice. Appendix A shows the updated value of our investments. There is one point I want to, there's two major points in this report actually that won't have featured before, and the first one I'll talk about now. In the appendix, it shows that we have borrowed, we started borrowing out or been able to lend out money to other local authorities, so that will help our overall investment incomes, and that's a good thing. You'll note, or members will know, that we've loaned out £6 million to Thurrock Borough Council, which will mature in February next year. Now, the reason I'm bringing this to committee's attention is because there's been a lot of quite negative press around Thurrock Borough Council recently, and Essex County Council have been asked by the government to intervene and manage the finances of Thurrock Borough Council. So I want to address members' concerns around that, because that may, on the face of it, be alarming. First thing I've mentioned is that from the broker that arranged the deal, if you like, I've obtained several assurances that Thurrock can and will repay the loan in February 2023. But I should more importantly point out that there actually is no risk of default on inter-authority loans, because they are effectively underwritten by government anyway. And this is a statement that the CIPFA President, Rob Whiteman, came out with recently, that councils which have loaned money to Thurrock will not lose their investment because the government effectively takes steps to ensure that liabilities are met as part of the intervention. So there is not a risk to the council, in my professional opinion, of loaning the money to Thurrock. One other thing I should mention is that Thurrock have had a lot of loan arrangements with other councils, and they've not defaulted on any payments to those councils either. So hopefully that will give members some assurance that we've got a safe investment there that is going to deliver, say, hopefully about £70,000 worth of investment income. And it's also important to bear in mind that the reason that Essex County Council have been brought in is about concern about how Thurrock are managing more about their management of their investment strategy rather than any danger of defaulting on loan repayments. And it's also important to know that there are other councils, and I won't name them, but there are other councils that are that are in a, if you like, a more dire situation than Thurrock Council, and they still borrow money from other local authorities and make those repayments. So I just want members to bear that in mind. So investment performance continues to be around the 3.7% mark, and the loan to Thurrock will bring an additional income. It's an area that I'm keen to explore and sort of optimise those opportunities a bit more going forward as well. During the COVID pandemic and so forth, the inter-authority borrowing market was fairly flat, so there wasn't an awful lot of advantage to be gained from exploring those opportunities. But the situation is a little bit different now, although it's been stymied somewhat by the recent interest rate increases. But there are greater opportunities, and it's something that we will certainly be looking at more in the future in order to optimise our investment income from balances that we're holding in our accounts. There's not been any noticeable changes to our capital financing requirements and our net financing costs performance indicator, which I've explained in previous reports. The other major point that I want members to take on board in this report is something that we've picked up in the statement of accounts training earlier, actually. In paragraph 13, Ola, who wrote the report for me this quarter, has given a very good explanation of what the issue is there, and I'll try and explain it again. So we have investments in property funds with the CCLA and with Hermes. Their value, the value of the investment is about £8 million, or is £8 million. Now, when those values go up or down, the changes are not actually reflected in our usable reserves. They are adjusted against our unusable reserves, so they have no impact on our revenue budget setting process. And that's what's been known as the IFRS 9 override. Now, IFRS 9 is the relevant financial reporting standard that explains how you're supposed to treat, from an accounting point of view, any change in your pooled investments. Now, as I say, that change is currently done through the unusable reserves account. It has no impact on our council tax, has no impact on our usable reserves. Now, the government introduced that override in 2018, and the reason they did it was to give local authorities certainty over their budgeting. Now, I think it says in the report that the value of our investments has increased by £1.2 million. That, on the face of it, is great news. But if you think about the other side of it and think about what happened during the pandemic, our capital values of those investments fell. I think it was about, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, Chair, but I think it was around about £400,000 or £500,000. Now, without that override, that would have had a serious impact on our revenue budgeting, and we'd have had to have addressed, or would have had to have tried to fund it through council tax or usable reserves. So this override issue is quite important to the council, and the government have issued a consultation on it, and the consultation gives three options. One is, shall we continue with the override for another extended period? Shall we have the override embedded altogether and as a permanent feature of local authority accounts? Or should we say, right, you've had 5 years to deal with it, now you have to manage these situations as and when they arise? So there's potentially some major impact on the council here. As I say, at the moment, and as explained in paragraph 13, it's advantageous because our capital values are 1.2 million higher than what our original investment was. But it could, if it goes the other way, it could have an impact on our it could have an impact on our revenue budget. So just wanted members to be aware of that. I will be addressing it as part of the medium-term financial plan and budgeting process when we eventually get to it. It's not something that will affect us in 22-23, but it might impact from us from 23-24. The government, as I say, has opened up a consultation. We've responded to that consultation. Our preference is that we quite enjoy the stability that's behind the override, and we'd like to keep it in place. But clearly, the final say-so will lie with the DLUHC. Just a little bit about the economic outlook. I prepared my script on Wednesday, and by Friday it changed. So it's more of the same, really. Just to pick up a few of the highlights from Friday's mini budget that directly affect the council. The national insurance increase for employers and employees, the 1.25% increase is going to be reversed. That will help slightly ease our budget position. It will make a difference, and without wanting to sound ungrateful, it's not a huge amount of money, but it helps, and every little helps. Income taxes to be reduced by 1% next April. That's bringing forward the planned increase. The planned reduction that was originally planned for April 24. That's now been brought forward to April 23. The higher rate tax band has now been abolished for high earners over £150,000 a year. That 45% band has now been abolished. We've got the energy bill relief scheme, which will benefit us at the moment for 6 months. It's not something that we need to take any action over. The reduction will be reflected in our energy bills, and that also applies to new contracts that have been taken out, and ours was taken out this financial year. So it's not that we're going to get money back, we won't, but the cost increase is not going to be quite as severe in 22-23 as we'd originally thought. Stamp duty has been, I can't remember what the actual changes were now, but it's been reduced for certain bands, and that may help the council, for example, in its in solar houses and its housing developments. And corporation tax doesn't directly affect the council, but the proposed increase from 19% to 25% has been abolished. It may help us in terms of it won't that businesses will benefit from it, and that will protect, or that may possibly protect, some of our business rate income across the district. Impossible to quantify what the actual impact will be, but it's from the council's point of view, they're all good things that will hopefully help us going forward. There may be other knock-on impacts, impact across the financial piece in future years. We shall see whether it's a successful set of announcements or not. It's very much open to. It's a bit of a guessing game, quite frankly, Chair, at the moment, and it makes for budget planning a bit of a lottery at times. That's it from me on the Treasury Management Report, and I'm happy to try and field any questions, but preferably not any on the economic outlook.
Yeah, well, without those changes, you'd be bored, Tony. We'd have nothing to do, would you?
Yeah.
Are there any questions on this item, please? Yes, Mr. Farr.
Only a couple, Tony, you'll be pleased to know. On your investments, I was delighted when last meeting you told us that Lloyds now pay, I can't remember exactly what the percentage is, but a percentage above bank rate. Now it's gone up again, that 1.65 is going up further and will go up a lot further. Would it therefore not make sense to consider taking the Barclays and Santander monies and putting them into Lloyds? Because they'll earn more money.
Through yourself, Chair. Yeah, it's a situation that we're keeping under review, and strangely enough, we've had some conversations with Barclays, not so much around the rate that they offer, but around how we access the money and how we can quickly get our hands on it to move it around if we need be. But I think Mr. Farr makes a very good point, and yeah, we'll certainly review what our options are with regards to that, whether it's worth putting into a Lloyds account or maybe worth putting into another higher interest bearing.
Whoever wants to give us most.
Yes.
One last question, and I'll shut up for the evening. On your last page, page 8 of that account, you list all the income coming from various properties, and I just wasn't clear whether the income shows as the annual rent income. Is that net of borrowing? the borrowing costs? Because you identified previously against some of those properties the repayments each year against it, but it's not clear whether the income is net of that or not.
Sorry, through yourself, Chair. I think the table to which you're referring to, Patrick, is on the very final page, page 8.
Yeah, on the final page there, you show the rental income against, for example, 14 Terminus Road, but you also point out that we're paying, on the previous page, on page 6, the current borrowing portfolio says we're paying £16,102 repayment for that each year. Is the income net of that payment?
Well, Madam Chair, the income's gross. There is, as you say, there's a table in the body of the report that shows what our overall return is on our property investment, on the properties that we purchase under the property investment strategy. The reason why the income is shown as gross is because we don't really borrow, we don't necessarily take out a loan to borrow against an individual property. It's done on a cash flow basis, so it's actually quite tricky to sort of say, well, we've taken out that amount of borrowing and it's purchased A, B and C. It doesn't quite work like that. We manage it in the whole, if you like. So that's why we have the table within the body of the report that gives, hopefully gives members a little bit more information around how successful or how well our property purchases are performing.
Do we, even when we look at the total figure, take the interest back off so that we have an idea of what the net income is?
Yes, we do.
You do, on the overall figure?
Yes, and that's okay. That's reported in the body of the report.
Thank you. Question for me, just following on from that answer. Sorry,
Councillor Coulter.
Okay, just before we come to that one, it's a question based on Mr. Farmer's question. What triggers a review of where the money is invested, like Barclays and moving it into NatWest? What triggers that?
I think it's fair to say that during the pandemic, because there wasn't an awful lot of activity, it wasn't something that we reviewed. We reviewed it probably every month, may say every quarter maybe, but because activity was so slow, there wasn't really much point in reviewing it any more regularly than that. It depends on what rates are out there, depends what offers are out there, depends what our brokers come back to us with. At the moment, because we've loaned money out to Thurrock, we haven't got a huge amounts of cash kicking around doing very little. So there's probably not an awful lot we can do now until the loan repayment from Thurrock matures in February. But it's a situation that we monitor our cash flow every single day of the week. And that's because we have, it's a very busy account. As I explained, I think I might have explained it either in the Treasury Management training or in the Statement of Accounts report itself. We've got upward of nearly £100 million washing through our accounts. A lot of that isn't our money. A lot of that's money that we have to pay to preceptors. So, as I say, we've got a very robust cash flow model that we look at and monitor every day. And as I say, we will be looking to sort of up our investment activity a little bit more now that the rates are going to be a bit more favourable to us and it's more worthwhile doing it. It's something that we're looking to increase in terms of reviewing our balances on a daily basis, and it's resource intensive. It takes a lot of time to do it, but we have started to put a little bit more resource into that.
Thank you, Councillor Coulter.
Broadly, Chair, you've just asked what I had in mind. If I can just elaborate on that slightly, could holding balances with 3 banks be a safety measure in the unlikely event that one bank fails?
Absolutely, and that's actually one of the reasons why we do it. Now, to pick up on Mr. Farmer's point, we could still move from Barclays to another counterparty that's listed in our investment strategies. There's nothing to stop us reviewing it on that basis, but that is exactly why we do have the money spread across different institutions, so that we don't fall into a BCCI trap, if you remember BCCI and the Icelandic banks situation. That's exactly why we do. We spread the investments like that. So sometimes we don't necessarily get the optimal rate of return that we like on our investments, but this is also not just about getting as much money as we can, but it's also about safeguarding money in in the event that, hopefully unlikely event that one of the banks does collapse.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes, then Councillor Langlands. Councillor Barnes.
I just wondered whether I see we've put in evidence in favour of perpetuating the present system on the current consultation. Have we had any indication from the government when they're likely to reach a decision? And can we urge them to do so? Because effectively it's going to make budgeting quite difficult if we don't know.
Through you, Chair, if I may. There is a deadline to the consultation. I apologise off the top of my head. I can't remember what it was.
6th of October.
So, so one would hope that the upshot of that consultation will be delivered fairly quickly. As for your point about budgeting, yes. But it's just one of many other things that that adds to the complexity. I mean, at the moment, the value of our funds they're on the right side of the figures. So I wouldn't anticipate any problems in 23-24 if they did decide to do away with the override. Beyond that is difficult to predict.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought you implied it wouldn't affect this year's budgeting.
Sorry, it won't affect. Beg your pardon. It
23-24.
It won't affect 2022-23. I don't think it will have. My feel is that it won't have an impact on 23-24 either, or a negative impact, should I say, if they did get rid of the override. But beyond that, it's very difficult to predict. What we will do is engage our Treasury Management Specialists, Link Asset Services, and get a feel for them as to how they think the investments may behave, and also interact, as we have been doing recently, with the CCLA and Hermes. And you may remember that I think it was CCLA delivered a presentation to this committee a few months ago. So we're active in engaging with those people. But flipping back to the consultation with our asset management specialists, treasury management specialists, Link. I read their bulletins. We get them every day. We get a bulletin every single day. So we have got our finger on that pulse. But their forecasts change literally on a daily basis, and it's just so volatile at the moment that a forecast that they were supposed to revisit their bank forecasts. They were supposed to reissue bank forecasts this afternoon, and they put that back now a day. I'm not quite sure why, but it could change again in a month's time. Every time the Bank of England every time the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee meet and make a decision on interest rates, it has sorry to use the phrase, it has a trickle-down effect, there's a concertina effect on everything else that we do. So it's difficult, but we'll make assumptions in the medium-term plan. In the budget, we'll spell out what those assumptions are when the paper comes to committee, as we do every year, and members will be more than entitled, obviously, to make observations on that.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor Langlands.
Thank you, Tony. It was just a quick question. Where does the lottery money go?
I think I'm right in saying it's going back into the community grants money in the capital programme. There's 130,000 in the community grants. I think that's its official title. In the capital programme, there's £130,000 there, and I'm sure the lottery money is going back into that.
Having won three goes in the next one, I think they quoted something like £30,000 so far has gone into the council from that, and obviously 30,000 has gone to the good causes that sign up for it. Thank you. Right. In the absence of any questions, I'll remember again to have someone propose that we note this report. Thank you. Councillors Barnes and Thomas. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. Right, item 10, the work programme. Monday the 5th of December includes our standards part and our standard independent persons. And should we, I was thinking the monitoring of the capital programme, perhaps we'd be devilish and put it in both so that we get an interim in December, and if that's too soon for a meaningful report, we get a second stab at it in March. Anyone, any observations on that? No? Well, I'm going to say we'll do that then. God, the power. It's incredible. So if we can add the monitoring of the capital programme audit as a result of that, as a result of the audit onto that, please. Anyone got any observations about the work programme? In that case, I shall shut up while I'm ahead, and I'll declare this meeting closed. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your attendance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.